My name is Ken.
And my name is Jason.
And today we're looking at
Mansions of Madness.
So, oh look, another Lovecraftian horror game. No bias on our part, am I right?
No comment. So, Mansions of Madness was published by Fantasy Flight Games just in 2011, actually, so it's pretty recent.
Mm-hmm.
And it was designed by Corey Knizia, and I apologize if I butchered that name, not that that's really stopped us before.
No, not particularly. So, Mansions of Madness is a survival horror style game based in the Lovecraftian mythos, specifically the Lovecraftian mythos that Fantasy Flight has been sort of building up over time. This is a dungeon crawl sort of type of feel to it,
Yep.
but with a heavy focus on problem solving and puzzle solving and solving basically a mystery.
So, the various scenarios of this game, they really touch on a lot of stuff that you would find in the Lovecraft stories. And in particular, instead of just having to fight monsters, you can actually barricade doors, hide from them, which is, typically what you would see in a Lovecraft story rather than, somebody trying to hit it with everything they've got.
Absolutely. So there's a very good sense of theme in this.
Mm-hmm.
The Keeper it represents a malevolent force inside the house that's actually trying to control monsters and just controls the various effects and is stopping you, the investigators, from understanding the mysteries. So first we're going to go over the components for Mansions of Madness. First I'm going to show you the map components. So you have various room tiles. There's a ton of different configurations of these. They're all double-sided. This is where you're going to spend most of your time. All of your time, rather. These are the sealed doors. These will be noting when some doors just simply are not on the map. And these are some various room features, and I'm not going to go over all the individual uses of these right here. Now let's talk about the investigator pieces. You've got your investigator figures. Each investigator has their own individual card. Each investigator comes with 4 trait cards, and all the trait cards have individual abilities. Some will give the investigator individual items, or once a game, or several times a game abilities. There are also skill tokens. These replace the clue tokens from Arkham Horror, for those who are familiar. And there's also spell cards. These spell cards are all double-sided. Now let's look at some of the scenario and exploration items that you'll find in this game. So there are several items that are going to be strewn about on the map. We have obstacle cards, lock cards. These are item cards, and they come in various flavors. And these are clue cards. If you'll note, the clue cards and the item cards actually have the same back. Whereas the lock cards and the obstacle cards are very, very distinct from these two. This is so that the clues can be hidden amongst all the other items, and you don't necessarily know where they're going to come up at. We also have the story choice indicators. Each one has a note of which story choice has been made, and this is based on the clues. We have the scenario objective card, and this is based on the storyteller's, or the keeper's rather, choice of the first clue. And then we have the time event deck. So these tokens here are placed on the back of these event cards, and once they reach the number indicated at the bottom of the card is flipped and the scenario or the event is revealed and resolved. These I actually didn't order properly, but they're supposed to go in order from 1, 2, 3 to 5. Next we're going to go over some of the keeper-oriented cards. We have the attack cards. These come in each different flavor of the monster types. That's humanoid, beast, and Lovecraftian, horror, eldritch, madness things. We have the keeper action cards. All these cards individually are double-sided, so that these can never be hidden from the players. These are always well known as to what they are. Here we have the Mythos cards, and I actually have these separated by each individual type of Mythos cards. There's several different ones indicated by these icons here. And these will be very drastically different depending on the scenario. We also have the injury cards. They come in mental and physical injuries. And we have the monster tokens and figures. So each monster is attached to a base. These are done randomly, and they have... So in some cases there's sort of like a swarm of them, like there's a ton of cultists, but in these cases there's only really a couple Shoggoths, Chthonians, and Bayekis, or Miyagos, rather. Next we have the puzzles. These come in the form of electrical puzzles in various types, lock puzzles, which use these tokens, and then rune puzzles, which there's a couple different, it's just matching the objects together.
So, on to setup. Now, kind of mind the bits that are strewn across the table. There's a lot of pieces, and obviously we don't have as much room to put them as we would like, so, you know, we'll figure out where everything's going to go. So the first step is to choose the story that you're going to be playing, and there's a number of different scenarios that you can choose from. I think there's 5 in the base set, and, you know, there's a bunch of extra expansions that you can get to. So for this one, we've chosen to do the first scenario, the introductory scenario, just because it's, you know, a little simpler and we can, you know, get through it a little easier. The next step is to choose who is going to be the keeper and who are going to be the investigators. In this case, we've kind of decided beforehand that Kenny is going to be the keeper because he's got the most experience in it.
Sorry.
Anywho, and I'm going to be playing the investigator. So the next step is to set up the monsters. So you just want to take all of the various monster pieces and make sure the appropriate cardboard token is put into the bottom. Make sure you mix them up a little bit and don't actually look at the bottom, you know, because there are different stats for each individual monster. But yeah, just make sure that it's the proper thing. So this says Shoggoth, so that's, you know, check. Also, you can see that this Shoggoth is actually painted. Others in the set are not. So sometimes you're going to want to, you know, sort of switch these around because otherwise you will be able to tell which monster is which, and you'll know how much HP it has by process of elimination. So, you know, you've got to try and hide that. Next up, you're going to want to set up the markers and tokens. So thankfully, Kenny is very, very organized and has them all in one nice little box. So basically all we have to do is open this up and set it nearby. So check. Now the investigators and keeper should claim their individual setup cards. So for the investigators, this is going to be their actual character cards, and the keeper is going to claim all of the actions and everything that are associated with the scenario. There are also 2 books included with the game. There's the Keeper Guide, which goes to the keeper. So here you go, Ken.
Thank you.
And the Rules of Play also doubles as the Investigator Guide if you just flip it over. So I'm going to keep that.
So at this point, Jason is going to start setting up the map since he's playing the role of the investigators here. The Investigator Guide has the listing of exactly how the map is supposed to go, so he's going to set up to that specification. I'm going to start setting up some of the keeper icons on the side, and then afterwards he's going to go on and do the rest of the investigator setup.
So this is essentially what the investigators are going to see in the guide. So this is for Story 1, the Fall of House Lynch. So first of all, it's going to show you each individual map piece, how they're oriented. It's going to show what doors are sealed off, and it's going to show what features you should place just through the colored icons here. So I'm going to get that set up first. So this is essentially the map. Now I just have to put all of the various tokens as indicated by the book. So some of these doors are actually going to be sealed, and there are going to be a few like altars and hiding spaces and that sort of thing. Alright, so all the bits are set up, so now it's up to Ken to get this fixed up while I choose all of my investigator stuff.
So for the keeper setup, we're just going to go through this right now. So as a note, to avoid spoilers, if you are playing an investigator and you're not planning on playing the keeper on your first time through and you're actually using this video to kind of get an idea how the game plays, you should skip ahead to this time code. Don't keep watching, just skip ahead to this time code here, and then everything will be all cool. Then you can start talking about investigator stuff again. Right now, this is just for the keepers. It's just you and me, keepers. So first off, as a keeper, you have to make your story choices. So in this case, the Fall of House Lynch has 3 points where you have to choose story choices. The first story choice says, the cause of Walter Lynch's insanity is, and you have 3 options, A, B, and C. I'm not going to go over those specific options, but I'm going to let you know that for the cases of this game, I have chosen option 1B. You take the story choice icons and you actually place it down in front of the map to indicate that that has been your choice. This way there's never any question of which choice you have made, and then the players, if they need to go back on something, can say, oh, you've made this choice, blah, blah, blah. Number 2 is Walter Lynch's wife has been buried in the... And for this I've chosen 2B. And finally, Walter Lynch's favorite hiding spot is the... And I've chosen 3A. Now, keepers, it is time to get your scenario cards, and let's get those all ready for your players. First things first. You have to go through the clue cards and actually choose out the clues that you have taken. So again, I chose 1B, so I'm going to get clue 1B. I took 2B, so I'm also going to get clue 2B. And finally, 3A, clue 3A. You're going to want to replace the rest of these back to your bag or box or whatever have you hidden from the rest of the players. Now you're going to want to go through the objective cards, and you're going to want to choose the objective card of clue number 1, rather. So in my case, I have chosen clue 1B. This is going to be face down and hidden from the investigators until they have successfully found clue 1B, and this token has been flipped over to reveal this. As the keeper, though, you should be aware of what the objective is. So you should read that and understand what the objective is so that you can properly go through the game and know what your objective is. The players are not going to know until, hopefully it's too late, but they may still be able to foil you if they're quick. Now you're also going to want to set up the event deck. So it's set up in reverse order, so you want to place 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Near the event deck, you're going to want to set up the time counters. As a note, it's very important to remember to put these on the deck because this is what progresses the game, aside from what you interact with the players. Now that we have our clue cards, we can go through the investigator cards. The items, rather. First off, separate out all the you find nothing of interest cards and leave them to the side. Now you're going to want to go through the investigator cards. So in this particular scenario, we need the axe, the elder sign, the fire extinguisher, the lantern, the magic phrase, the nameless cults, and so on until you've claimed all the appropriate exploration cards. Now make sure you take out the appropriate nothing of interest cards. So in this case, the scenario requires 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Next, claim the appropriate obstacle cards and the appropriate lock cards. Now it just occurred to me that I haven't said this yet, but I don't really think it needs to be really said, but I'm going to say it anyway. These should all be hidden from your players. They should not know what you are retrieving. Although if they've played the scenario before, they may have a basic idea of what to expect. You shouldn't really just outright show them what's there. So I've kind of been doing this openly, but I'm also sort of assuming that your players are probably not present or that you're, hiding them immediately. I'm doing this for you, keepers. It's just between you and me right now. Next, you got to build your mythos deck. So in this case, we're looking for icons at the bottom here, and we're looking for the bat icon, the door icon, and the stairs going up icon. These actually have real names, but we're just going by what they look like to make it easier on you to try to find them. The Mythos deck is then going to consist of these 3 types of cards, or however many cards your scenario demands. And you simply just put them all together in any way you like, and then shuffle them all up. Next, claim your keeper action cards. I've actually sort of done this in advance. Again, these are double-sided, so anyone who looks at the card is going to be able to tell what it is you actually have in front of you. so these are never secret. And finally, we have the step of your starting cards and threat. So I'm going to start this game as the keeper with 1 threat and 1 mythos card drawn to my hand. Now finally, and I know this has already been somewhat long already, but this is kind of the longest part, is to seed all the rooms with these cards that you've drawn from the various decks. So when you're placing these seed cards, it's very important that, 1, you pay attention to the story choice on the actual seeds. So say an example here, we've got 2A and 2B in the basement landing. 2A has a significantly different configuration than 2B. And it's also very important that you place the cards down in the order that they have listed them in, because most of the clues actually indicate a specific card that will be located in that room. So in the example of clue 1 here, you have to encounter the magical lock before you encounter clue 1. In the case of our clue A, or 3A, you're going to encounter the locked door, then the puzzle box, then clue 2, and then clue 2 is going to indicate that you encounter a magic phrase. So it's very important that you encounter them in this order. So it'll look something like this. As a note, you may have noticed as you were seeding your cards in that there are several rooms that were not indicated to actually have an item go into that specifically, and you're going to also have a little pile of extra cards left over at the end as well. What you do with those cards, you shuffle them all up together. It'll be various actual cards and nothing of interest cards, and you randomly distribute them to each room that doesn't have a card already in it. So this is one room, this is one room, this is one room, etc.
So now that we're all done with Kenny's top secret keeper type stuff, we're going to get into the investigator setup. So in this case, I'm going to be the only investigator, but you can have up to 4, and the setup is pretty much the same. So the first step for the investigators is to actually choose their investigators. So in this case, I'm going to choose Joe Diamond.
The old fallback.
Yep. So you put his card in front of you. You also take all of the various item and trait cards. Now at this point, you're going to have 2 each of the physical and the mental traits. You have to choose 1 of each. And so you can kind of customize your character a little bit in this way, but you do have to choose 1 or the other, and each one will have either a special ability or it'll give you an item or something like that. So in this case, for my physical traits, I'm going to choose License to Kill, which allows me to start the game with my 45 automatics card. So I'll put that next to me here. And for my mental traits, I'm choosing my On the Case card. And this allows me once per game, when I reveal a clue card while exploring, I actually gain 3 skill points. And skill points are pretty useful, so that's a good thing. The remaining trait cards and any extra item cards basically go back in the box. Finally, you find your investigator figure, and you place that figure on the start space. So in this case, the foyer.
So as some final points for setup, make sure that the combat cards are sorted appropriately and give them a good little shuffle before you actually put them in. Make sure these guys are accessible to both the keeper and the player, though the keeper is probably going to be the ones dishing these out for when they're appropriate. And hope you never have to fight some Eldritors. Make sure the Mythos deck is accessible to the keeper. Make sure the trauma cards are also accessible to the keeper. Have the spells sorted by their type. And place them somewhere accessible by more like the investigators, but it doesn't really particularly matter. Make sure you give them a good shuffle too, that's important. Have the puzzle tokens for the electrical puzzles and the lock puzzles ready to go. I have these sort of off screen, but I have all the puzzle pieces for these puzzles ready and accessible. The room puzzles, I just leave in the little bags until they come up. Make sure you got your monsters around here somewhere. In theory, you're supposed to have all of them out and ready, rather than just the ones appropriate for this game, but you may find this works or doesn't work for you as appropriate. Make sure your keeper cards Your keeper action cards are all readily accessible and all out for all to see.
And now you're ready to play.
So to set the mood, the keeper starts off with the first clue. Light rain falls on your face as you exit the car into the front of the estate. The house is huge, unkept, and shrouded in eerie silence as you approach. You rap on the door and there is no response. A moment later, the door creaks open of its own accord, and you enter the foyer of the enormous mansion. As you set foot inside the vacant home, you notice the faint smell of burnt food. Perhaps someone forgot to turn off the stove. So as far as turn order goes in this game, there isn't really necessarily an appropriate phases in terms of the order that the investigators go. First off, though, the game does start at the investigator's turn. Any investigator may take their turn at any time on the investigator's part of the phases. However, they must complete their whole turn before their turn passes to the next investigator. So investigator cannot take part of their turn, then pass off to the next person, and then finish theirs after the next person. On an investigator's turn, they have 2 movement steps and 1 action step. They can use these in any order, so movement, action, movement, 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 action, movement, movement, however they like. The investigator actions can be used to accomplish many things. They can be used to run, which essentially turns the action into an additional movement step. They can use a card ability, so that means that they would use the ability of one of their cards that says action. They may drop items. This is, they may leave items of exploration or their starting items of any kind in a room for another investigator to pick up. They can attack a monster in their room or within their range if they have weapons that are using range. This is, of course, resolved based on the combat dex, not just on a simple roll of the dice, in most cases. Or they may explore. If they choose the explore action, they encounter every card in the room, so not just in their space, in order from the top to the bottom. The keeper takes the stack of cards and reveals them one at a time, or rather they read them to the investigators, revealing the information one at a time. During movement, each step of movement takes an investigator across 1 white barrier into a room or adjacent room. So in the case of this room here, this is all one location. This is one location. This is one location. This is one, and this is one. So when moving around, Joe Diamonds is starting off in this area here. However, one movement could take him to here. One movement could take him to here. Or here. So simply 2 movement would be 1, 2, 1, 2, and so forth. A room is only considered adjacent if there's a connecting feature between the 2 rooms. So in this case here, although this is a set of stairs and there is simply a white border going around here, Joe Diamond cannot simply just jump off the balcony. He must actually go around. In this case, he can go through this door, but he cannot go through here because there's no door connecting. I think that's fairly obvious. If Joe Diamond was going to move into a room that had a lock, they would place their investigator in that room as they would normally to indicate that they have moved into that room. However, the keeper actually reads off the card, and then the keeper and the investigator determine whether or not the investigator is able to enter that room or access that room appropriately. So in this case, there's some sort of thing that is locked, and because I have not given Joe any further items yet, he cannot actually access that room. What that means is that Joe is forced to go back to the room he came in from. So he could not go out to a different room that was adjacent to it and whatever. Because for all intents and purposes, he hasn't actually gone into the room yet. He's just tried to go into the room. And the movement step is wasted. Well, wasted, of course, being a relative term here. He knows what he actually needs to get into that door now, and that might actually be more important than not checking at all. However, if for some reason he's able to get through, like say he has the appropriate key or whatever, he goes in and he goes to the room normally. Revealing the lock, though, does not reveal the rest of the items, so he has to take a separate exploration action to reveal the rest of the things in that room. So, now I'm going to explain the different types of actions. Again, run is simply you just take another movement step. That's very simple. This follows all movement step rules as well, so you don't get any further benefit from running aside from just covering more distance in lieu of actually performing another action. Alternatively, you may take a card action. So in the case of Joe Diamond's current configuration, he has the 45 automatics. And one of the parts is action, attack a monster within 2 range. And if the monster is within 1 range, gain +2 marksmanship. So Joe Diamond would be using the action of this card to attack a monster. That may be a little confusing to some, but understand that the benefit here is that he has used this weapon to gain more range. The action is to gain more range to attack a monster here. In theory, he could just say, I have a ranged weapon, and go to attack a monster. However, this would mean that he has to be within a certain distance. He wouldn't have the range, because this is what gets the range. And in addition to that, he would not get the benefit of the extra marksmanship if he was within close range of the monster. At any rate, though, cards that give you an action are clearly labeled action. This should not be very hard to recognize. You may drop items in a room. So say an example, if Joe Diamond started off this room and he decided for some reason he didn't want his 45 automatics any longer. He could choose, as an action, to drop his items in the room. Any number of items that he has. And these are, again, exploration items or starting items. You can't drop spells, you can't drop other various things like that. Another investigator, in order to get those items, has to come to that room and actually take an exploration action to pick up the rest of those cards. Investigator may use their action to attack a monster. So in this case, Joe would most likely use his action to gain range, but fundamentally it would still work the same way as an attack would. So regardless of whether or not he took the action of here or he had another weapon, you do have to declare your weapon of choice when you go to make the attack. So in this case, he's using his 45 automatics. And yes, of course, he's using the action to gain the range here, but again, he's still making the attack here. This is what we're talking about. If you have no weapons whatsoever, or if you for some reason chose to, you could choose to no weapon. You can make unarmed attacks against opponents. These generally are not in your favor, but they are useful as a last-ditch effort sometimes. So Joe is going to attack the Shoggoth. The storyteller matches the monster's type with the appropriate combat deck. So in this case, the Shoggoth is an Eldritch monster, so we draw from the Eldritch deck. And then the first combat card revealed, if it is appropriate, in this case it actually is resolved. So there are several different ways that this might come up. Sometimes it might be a sharp weapon or a blunt weapon. It could be a ranged weapon, or it could be unarmed. And there's a bunch of different variants of those things as well. It might just say melee, all these sort of things. But you take the first one that applies to the situation when it comes up. So in this case, the storyteller would read off, there's only one way to damage the abomination. You take 1 damage to test your marksmanship +1. Otherwise, there would be no effect. The storyteller must also let the player know what the passing and failing effects are before they attempt to roll. So on a pass, you would actually deal extra damage, so weapon damage +1. On a fail, though, you are stunned. So in this case, Joe takes 1 damage and tests his marksmanship +1. Luckily for him, because he's within 1 range of the Shoggoth, his 45 automatics are actually going to give him an additional +2 marksmanship. So he's going to be testing his marksmanship +3. So he's got a pretty good chance of making this. He rolls a 2. That's under his skill. He's good to go. So he successfully does the pass effect and deals weapon damage +1. His weapon damage is 3, so he deals a 4 damage to the Shoggoth. Now there are tabs on the Shoggoth here to actually slide in the damage counters and such, but I'm just going to leave it up here so you can see them appropriately. And then, since the Shoggoth has actually taken damage, Joe is now actually allowed to pick up the monster and look at it underneath to actually see what he does. So it's a fairly nasty monster there. He doesn't want to really meet him in a dark alley, or at all. So now Joe has a better idea of what he's facing up against. And the final sort of action is the explore action. Again, the keeper takes all the cards in the room and reveals the text on the card to the players by telling it to them one at a time. So in this case, I'm not going to spoil what's in the first room here, but you do have to, if you encounter any obstacles, so say Joe is investigating over here. This is an obstacle. He would have to actually attempt to complete this obstacle before he goes any further with the investigation, or the exploration of that room, rather. If he does not successfully complete the puzzle, or whatever it is that the obstacle is in this case it is a puzzle, then he can choose to continue moving on, or doing whatever, but he cannot explore past that card until he has successfully completed the demands of that obstacle. Locks are discarded by having the appropriate keys. I think that's fairly obvious. And the case of finding clues. This is actually one of the most important reasons why it's important for the storyteller, or the keeper rather, to actually be the one reading off these clues. Because the clue will often relate to where the next clue could be found, and it often relates to what you actually are going to get as an item for taking this clue. Next, we're going to go over making checks. All checks in this game are made with a D10, and always compare to a trait of some sort. The investigators will be using the traits on their trait cards. The storyteller, or the keeper rather, will be making trait checks with other things potentially, but it's always roll the die. If it's equal to or lower than the trait that you're rolling against, then it's a success. If the result is greater than the trait, the check is a failure. However, results of 1 are always a success, regardless of what the trait is. And results of 10 are always a failure, regardless of what the trait is. So it's always possible to succeed a check, and it's always possible to lose a check, no matter how good or bad you are at it. Next, we're going to explain skill points. So Joe over here actually has 3 skill points. Skill points are hard to come by in this game, and you only start off with a couple, and you don't get any back generally. Joe actually has the ability to gain more later on, but that's a fairly special ability, and also used once per game. Skill points can be spent by an investigator to add their luck, which is their luck trait, to the check before they roll. It's very important that they have to make this this decision before they roll the die, because they can't choose to just add it in later on. The skill point is spent, of course, regardless of whether or not it's a success. The player still benefits from this if for some reason they're allowed to re-roll. So if they're allowed to re-roll the check, then they still get that luck bonus. However, whenever you're rolling luck, you can't spend a skill point to add your luck to the check. You can never add luck to luck. When you're rolling a luck check, you really are rolling a luck check, because these are generally everybody's lowest traits. Skill points can also be added when trying to solve a puzzle. Essentially, your luck can be added to your intellect for the purposes of determining how many puzzle actions you will get. So again, just to reiterate, skill points are actually a very limited resource and should probably be used fairly sparingly unless you're in dire straits. Now, there's a couple specific checks you're going to be making, and these are the horror checks and evade checks. A horror check is made whenever a monster enters into a room from another room, or is simply placed in the room as one or more investigators are in. All investigators in this room make a check. Horror tests are willpower checks, and these are modified by the monster's horror rating. So in this case, the Shoggoth has a horror rating of -4. So it's pretty terrifying. On a pass, there is no effect. However, the investigator will have to make this horror check again every single time the monster enters the room or a new monster is placed. On a failure, the investigator takes sanity loss. So they take this mental damage, they put it on their card, and this indicates that they have been damaged mentally. Next, we have evasion checks. An investigator must make an evasion check against every monster in the room before attempting any non-attack monster actions or a movement step. The check is based on dexterity, and it's modified by the monster's awareness. So in this case, a Shoggoth has an awareness value of 0, so it doesn't actually modify the dexterity. In the case of a Chthonian, though, a Chthonian gives a -1 to this check, so you would be making the check and -1. Some monsters will actually even add to your check. Things like zombies are actually very slow and easy to avoid. So on a pass, there's no effect. On a failure, though, the monster may inflict their damage on the character. The monster's damage is actually shown in an icon similar to the damage on your weapon cards. So the monster simply inflicts that damage on with no further effect, unless the monster actually has some further effect when it does so. Regardless of the results, though, the character is not restricted from performing the rest of their actions in whatever way. And they don't have to perform an evasion test every single time that they try to do a non-attack action. They simply just do this when the first time they're contested, and then they go on from there. However, if they ran into more monsters that they have not made evasion tests against successfully or unsuccessfully, they must then make evasion tests against them. So if Joe Diamond was in this space and the Shoggoth was here and he's trying to get past him, and there was a Chthonian in this space over here, and Joe was trying to run past the Chthonian or the Shoggoth and get up to here for some reason, he would have to make an evasion test and then get damaged or not. Then so that's one step. One more step to get into here with a Chthonian. And then if he wanted to move past the Chthonian, he would have to make another evasion test, being damaged by the Chthonian or not. And then he's made his 1, 2, 3 moves. Next, let's talk about damage. Players who take damage are at risk of injury cards and death. If a character dies, that is, the damage they've taken has reached their health, they drop all their exploration items in the room, they return their spells to the appropriate spell decks, and the character is returned to the box. The player chooses a new character from those available, and after this whole turn has been resolved, they place their investigator model in the start location of the map. If there are no investigators to choose from, then the player is simply eliminated. In addition, at the end of the game, after the final objective has been drawn, if an investigator dies at that point, no further investigators can be replaced by them, even if there are more investigator cards remaining. Next, let's talk about horror. Players who take horror are actually at risk of some pretty nasty insanity cards. Characters who are at 0 sanity are actually insane. They continue on playing as normal, but there are some entry cards that can only be played on insane or 0 sanity player characters, and they are really, really nasty. Up to and including attack your own allies or kill yourself. Alright, now let's talk about status effects. Status effects come in 3 flavors: stun, fire, and darkness. Stun tokens affect monsters and players similarly, but differently. If an investigator takes a stun token, it's placed on their sheet. Having any amount of stun tokens, so 1 or more stun tokens, inflicts a -2 penalty on all checks. As a note, this is not -2 for every one, just to be clear. While a player has any amount of stun tokens on their sheet, their action can only consist of 1 movement step. If they took the stun on their turn for some reason, they then end their turn. Stun tokens are removed 1 at a time during the investigator's trade step, during the keeper actions phase. If a monster is stunned, the stun token is played on their stand, and stunned monsters cannot move or attack. Stun tokens for monsters are removed 1 at a time, just like with investigators, at the end of the monster's attack step. So rather than being able to attack, the monster simply loses one of their stun tokens. Next, let's talk about fire. A fire token is placed on the room, and this is a status effect of the room itself, not the characters in the room. However, it definitely affects the characters in the room. Monsters in a room that's on fire take 2 damage at the end of every monster's attack step that they remain in that room. Investigators take 2 damage at the end of their turn if they remain in the room. So once they've successfully completed their turn, if they're still in a room that's on fire, they take 2 damage. If an investigator tries to enter a room on fire, they must actually make a willpower test. If they fail, they take 1 horror, and regardless of the result, they may still enter, similar to horror tests. If you run out of the provided fire tokens, and believe me, this has happened to me before, you can just substitute replacements. These are not a limited resource. And let's talk about darkness. Darkness tokens, like fire, are actually placed by the room's name, and they affect the whole room. Investigators who are in dark rooms take -2 to all checks, and this actually does stack with stun. So if you are stunned in a dark room, you're taking -4 to all your checks. That really sucks. Investigators who choose to use the Explore action must use an additional movement step to do so. So the Explore action actually costs an action and a movement step. So if you cannot provide both of those, then you cannot perform the Exploration action. Investigators that have items that ignore the effects of darkness also cannot be targeted with cards that require a dark room to play. So if a card says must be played on an investigator in a dark room, but they're holding a flashlight, they're not affected by that. And finally, for the investigators, let's talk about their spells. There are several different types of spells, and these are fairly rare in this game, whereas in Arkham Horror, they're actually fairly easy to come by. These are very, very rare. When you have a spell, you essentially are accessing the whole deck for your spell. You only ever have 1 spell card in front of you at any point in time. However, when you've cast that spell, it's returned back to the deck, and the deck is shuffled up. And then you receive a new card. Some of the cards have better results than others, and they have different results based on whether or not you succeed your spell check or you fail your spell check. So again, it's very important that investigators do not look at the back of any of their spell cards when they receive them. Generally speaking, if they succeed on the spell check, it'll usually have some pretty good results for them, and the intended effect will be pretty obvious by what it says on the front of the card. So again, after the spell's effect has been satisfied, the spell is discarded back to the spell deck, the deck is shuffled, and a new spell is returned back to you. So you're going to be constantly returning these cards back, but you're always going to have access to at least 1 spell, or 1 copy of that spell at any point in time. And you can also not have multiple copies of the same spell at any point in time. I should note that as well. So, in short, spells are very powerful and very useful, but are really dangerous and kind of unreliable. So use them sparingly, but use them when you feel safe. Or when you feel the least safe, I guess is probably more appropriate.
Alright, so now I'm going to go over the Keeper part of the turn. So the Keeper has 5 phases that he has to conduct, and they are in order: Investigator's Trade, Gain Threat, Keeper Action, Monster Attack, and Event. Now, the Investigator's Trade, it's not really a Keeper thing, but it is kind of lumped in there just for, when it happens in the turn, for ease. And basically, if investigators are in the same space, and they do have to be in the same space, not just the same room, then they can actually trade items freely at this point. You can only trade key, equipment, weapon, artifact, ally, and tome cards. Anything else is not possible. And as previously mentioned, stunned investigators may now remove 1 of their stun tokens. Next up is Gain Threat. So the Keeper gains threat equal to the number of investigators that started the game. Investigators that are eliminated still generate threat. So in this case, Ken is going to be generating 1 threat every turn because there is only 1 investigator. Unused threat is actually carried over between turns, so the Keeper can actually build up threat to use higher cost cards and actions later on. And next up is actually the Keeper action, and here the Keeper performs his actions, generally spending threat to do so. So any movement that he gets to do with his monsters, it follows pretty much the same movement rules as investigators, except that monsters can actually ignore obstructions and locks. The Keeper hand limit is 4 trauma and 4 mythos cards. Exceeding this limit, the keeper must discard down immediately. Monster attack is actually pretty straightforward. Monsters in the same space as investigators must attack. And again, it has to be the same space, not just the same room. A monster can only attack one investigator around, so the keeper gets to choose there. Stun monsters, as mentioned previously, cannot attack, but they can instead remove one stun token at the end of this step. And again, combat in this situation pretty much follows the same basic steps as with investigators. So you would draw from the appropriate deck. So again, if there's a Chthonian, then you would draw from the Eldritch Horrors deck. And the second part of the card is used, the one that says monster attacks, instead of the top part. In this case, instead of having different types of weapons, it's different statuses. So basically, there's cards that say monster versus barrier, like this one. So that would be the one used if the monster is attacking a barrier that the investigator has barricaded a room with. And finally is the event step. Now during this step, the keeper basically adds 1 time token to the top of the event deck. If this actually causes the number of tokens to equal the number at the bottom of the top card of the deck, then all of the time is discarded. The event card is immediately resolved based on whatever the keeper's story choices are. And it should be noted that it's very, very important that the keeper remembers this, because this is their main way of advancing the story. These event cards are usually not good things for the investigators, so you want to make sure that you keep the pressure up. So next I'm just going to go over trauma cards very briefly. So as noted before, there are 2 types of trauma cards. There are injuries and insanities. Injuries can be played on investigators that have taken damage, and insanities can be played on investigators that take sanity damage or horror. Each investigator can only have 1 injury and 1 insanity card at a time, so if a new one is gained, the previous one is lost. So that's something the keeper has to kind of keep in mind. And in addition, some traumas can only be played when the investigator is at, or less than, a certain value of health or sanity. And that will be indicated on the card. Next up is Mythos cards. Now, Mythos cards can only be played on the investigator's turn. They usually have special conditions, and they generally require that threat is played. This is kind of one of the ways that the keeper can actually meddle in the investigator's turn, and it can be pretty devastating. So, as the keeper, you're going to want to try and have as many Mythos cards as possible, because these are sort of your bag of tricks. These are the things you can do that the investigators aren't going to know about ahead of time, so you can kind of, surprise them. Next, I'm going to go over the map features. So there's a few different features. I'm just going to go over each one briefly. First of all is the altar, and there is one in this scenario. They're used for various things. Usually the scenario will specifically say what it's used for. So, just watch the book for that. Next up is barriers. So, again, we have a barrier here. Investigators can actually spend an action to put the barrier on a door or to remove one. And investigators and monsters cannot move through barriers, though they can attack them. So again, this is essentially barricading the door so that a monster can't get at you. There are campfire tokens that are used in some scenarios. These are used by the keeper to spread fires, so to set rooms on fire, or by investigators to destroy corpses if they need to do so. Consequently, there are also corpse tokens, and these are used by the keeper for various effects, usually something like making zombies, and they can be moved by the investigators during their movement phase. There are hiding spaces, which are essentially little trunks that the investigators can crawl into to hide from monsters. This can be done as a movement step, and investigators cannot move, attack, or use spells while hiding. So they can't really do much. They just sit there and hope that the monsters pass them by. Some scenarios will also have ladders in them, And any investigator or humanoid monster, and that's the ones with the blue icons, can actually treat spaces with ladders in them as adjacent for the purposes of movement. So you can't fire through ladders if you have a ranged weapon, but you can move between those areas. There are also vents, and vents are essentially the same as ladders, but they can only be used by beast monsters, and that's the brown monsters. So again, spaces with vents are treated as adjacent for beast monsters. Next up is puzzles, which is kind of one of the unique things about this game. So there are 3 types of puzzles. There is wiring, lock, and rune puzzles. So when setting up a puzzle, well, except for rune puzzles, there will usually be a main piece and a stack of puzzle tiles, like these. Typically, when instructed to do so, you place the indicated main piece down, shuffle the puzzle tiles, and set up the puzzle with random puzzle tile pieces. And these are usually face down at first. The exception to this is rune puzzles, where all of the tiles are used, so they're just shuffled and essentially put into the appropriate configuration. So for example, an initial setup for a wiring puzzle might look something like this. Now there are different goals for each type of puzzle, basically. So for example, with the wiring puzzle, there is something labeled start and something labeled end. And you have to be able to trace a path from the start to the end using the connected wires. It's very important to note here that there are 2 different colors of wires. There are red and there are blue. And a connection does not count unless the same colored wire is being used. So in this case, the start wire is red, but the connecting wire here is blue. So this connection doesn't count until a red wire is used to connect it. Now, in order to solve these puzzles, investigators get puzzle actions based on their intellect. So in this case, Joe Diamond has 5 intellect, so he's going to get 5 puzzle actions. And they can actually use a skill point to add their luck to their intellect before they attempt the puzzle to get some extra actions. So there are 3 basic puzzle actions. First of all is swap. To swap, you swap the position of 2 adjacent tiles, like this. The orientation must remain the same, so you can't rotate them at the same time. Second, you can choose to rotate the tile 90 degrees. Again, this is one action. And finally, you can choose to simply draw a new tile from the stack and replace any one tile in the puzzle with it. This costs 2 puzzle actions. As soon as the puzzle is completed, the puzzle is discarded and whatever caused the puzzle to come into play is satisfied. And this is typically an obstacle, so usually the obstacle card is going to be discarded. So I already told you about wiring puzzles. Lock puzzles are completed when all adjacent symbols match, and rune puzzles are completed when the picture is complete. Now, puzzles can be very easy to abuse by the investigators. Generally, we kind of hope that everyone's playing in the spirit of the game, but just in case, the following rules should be enforced. First of all, anytime a puzzle action is used, it cannot be undone as soon as the piece is altered, unless the player spends another puzzle action doing so. So they can't just, screw around and try out different configurations. As soon as they move a piece, that is an action. If any investigator that is not currently attempting the puzzle offers advice where pieces go, reset the puzzle. The other investigators are not there, they are not able to help the player who is currently attempting the puzzle. So if they give any input whatsoever, the puzzle should be reset. Finally, we get to ending the game. Now, the end of the game is based entirely on the Keeper's secret objective and the event deck. The players must generally find all of the clues to reveal the objective, or the event deck may reveal the objective for the players. If that happens, though, they're probably in pretty bad straits because they haven't been pacing themselves enough. Now, the investigators may win, the Keeper may win, or both may lose. It is not, however, possible for both to win. And finally, at this point, I just want to go over a few pro tips that me and Ken have figured out as we've played this game. So, first of all, having the investigators set up the board before they do anything else is important, because the Keeper has to do things on the board, so obviously it's important that it's there. So make sure that the investigators do that. Second, use some sort of token to note that the investigators have taken their turn. The best way that we've found is that once the keeper has done their turn, they just hand each player one threat. Once the player has actually done their turn, they hand the keeper the threat back. So this is a good way of keeping track since, the investigators don't go in a set order. If you use this method, combine the time tokens with the threat to make sure that you don't forget to advance the time, because again, very important for the keeper. And finally, we just want to go over a couple of variant ideas. So this is a very scenario-based game, and so it has a lot of variability built into it. You're not going to be using all the components every game. It really depends on the story. And one of the great things about this is you can make your own story. But you should note, if you try to do so, that the scenarios are actually pretty intricate / balanced, so just make sure that yours are keeping things fair and keeping your players guessing. Because, you don't want it weighted too much in the keeper's favor, because otherwise the players are not going to like it. They're not going to have any fun. Alright, that's it. Let's go into example turns.
So now we're going to do the example turns for Mansions of Madness. As a note, we're probably just going to do one whole example turn. So Jason's going to do his investigator step, and then I'm going to do my keeper step. This is simply being done for two reasons. One, so you can get a basic idea on how things flow, and two, we don't want to get too far into the game because the game is heavily scenario and clue and hint based, and we don't really want to just give everything away for you guys right off the bat. So if we can, we might include an additional turn, but don't just expect that this is going to be fairly short. So we begin the game. I've already claimed my one Mythos card and my one threat from the very beginning of the game, from when we did the setup phase for the keeper. So we start the game with the investigator. So Jason, you are the only player. I'm going to give you a piece of threat. You can give that back to me when you're done.
Alright. So, to start the investigator's turn, I choose to let myself go first. Now, having played this once or twice, I do know that it's very important for the investigators to move things along as quickly as possible. So, in this case, I kind of got a clue at the start saying that something was burning. That kind of indicates that maybe I should be checking the kitchen. So, I could explore this room and see what's in there, but I think it's more important that I move towards the kitchen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one movement action to move here. I'm going to take my second movement to move here. And at this point I could either choose to use my action to spend another movement and move over here. It's probably not necessary though, because I'll be able to get into the kitchen next turn anyway. So at this point, I think I'm going to explore this room and see what's here. So at this point, all of the exploration cards that are in there are going to be revealed one at a time.
And that is my job. So, the first card is, you find nothing of interest. So I'm just going to take that back from you. And there are no further cards.
Alright, so in this case, I've used my 2 movement to move 2 spaces. I have used my action, so threat goes back. All of the investigators are out of threat. That means that it is now the keeper's turn.
So I take that threat and add it to my collection. So I now have 2 threat. And now just going through my steps. First we have the investigator trading step. Jason is the only player, so I guess we can pretty much ignore the step for the most part, except that if he's ever stunned, obviously he's going to need to remove his stun tokens at that point in time.
Actually, in this case, I would like to give my 45 automatics to myself.
Oh, you'd like to trade yourself for your 45 automatics?
Yes.
Okay. So the 45 automatics are now holding Joe Diamond. And we're going to go on to the gain threat step, which I have already accomplished by taking that threat in from when Jason gave it back to me after the end of his turn. So now I get to spend threat based on my keeper actions and my various Mythos cards. And yeah, so most good keepers will note Evil Presence is a very good way to start off the game. So, Evil Presence allows me to draw, so I'm going to take my 1 Mythos card in the hand here. Evil Presence allows me to draw 1 Mythos card and 1 trauma card. And that costs 1 threat to do. Since there's not really a whole lot else going on right now, I could choose to just end my turn and gain that threat back as part of Evil Presence's card. And yeah, I think I will do that. Seems like the logical thing to do. So I'm going to end my Keeper action step. So next is the monster's attack step. There are currently no monsters, and therefore none to attack. And finally we have the event step. I take 1 time token and put it on top of the event deck. Since the top card of the event deck has a 3, that means there's going to be 3 tokens that have to be placed on there before it's revealed. So we're still good for there for now. And that's the end of the Keeper phase.
Alright, since that was relatively uneventful, we can probably go through another example turn here. So again, it's going to start with the investigators here. So I'll take my threat coupon.
Here's your threat coupon, sir.
Thank you. So, again, Joe Diamond is going first. So, it's probably a good idea to go into the kitchen. So, again, I'm going to use 1 movement to move here, and then 1 movement to move into the kitchen. And finally, I'm going to use my action to explore.
Now, before you do that, I am actually going to use 1 threat to play the Mythos card, Plunged into Darkness.
Oh no!
The room gets very cold as the lights become blindingly bright. Your ears pop and every light in the room burns out. Place a darkness token in the investigator's room. So the kitchen is now a dark room. Because of that, this means that Jason, in order to take an exploration action, must actually use a movement step and and his action to actually explore that room. And this means that essentially I've stopped him from being able to explore that room.
Alright, well I guess that's pretty much all I can do then.
You could continue moving. You could use your action for other things as well.
Well, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of point right now, so I guess I'll just end my turn.
Successfully stopping Jason from foiling my plot. I'm going to take that threat back from him. Again, we ignore the investigator's trade step because, well, again, Jason's going to trade his 45 automatics with himself once more. And then I've gained my threat from Jason, as before. And I'm going to use Evil Presence once more. So I'm going to spend 1 threat to draw a Mythos card and an injury card. And I'm going to choose to end my turn to gain that threat back. So that ends the Keeper action step. We go into the monster's attack step, which again, there obviously are no monsters. And then we go to the event step. So that's going to be 1 more token on top. And now it's Jason's turn once more.
And again, that was pretty quick, so I guess we can get in a 3rd one. Alright, so I'll take my coupon.
1 threat coupon.
Thank you. So, at this point, the room's dark, so I have to spend a movement and an action to actually explore it. I guess I'll do so now, I'll still have 1 movement in reserve.
So before you do that, actually, I'm going to use What's for Dinner? The requirement must be that you are in the dining room or the kitchen, and you are, of course, in the kitchen. I'm going to get you to test your willpower, but +1.
Alright, so Joe Diamond's willpower is actually 7, so that means I have to test against an 8. So this shouldn't be too difficult. We'll see, though. I got a 4.
On a failure, you took damage in horror, but on a pass, nothing happened, so you're fine.
Yay!
My attempts to thwart you have gone unsuccessful now.
Alright, so in that case, I'm going to continue on with the exploration.
So the first card I reveal is Clue 3A. Alright, Matches of Madness! Woo!
Yeah, so one thing I really love about this, and actually it's one thing that Fantasy Flight's kind of been doing lately, is, you know, they kind of get these universes going. So they've got, you know, the sort of the realms of Terranoth, which is their fantasy thing. This is kind of their horror thing. They also have Android, which is their sci-fi. But yeah, I really like that there's a lot of continuity between these games. I mean, the characters from Arkham Horror are actually in this game.
Yep.
With the same backstories and everything. So I really like the whole continuity of that, so that it feels like it's part of a bigger story, which is really neat.
And that is really something that Fantasy Flight Games does like completely nail on the head. Like if you don't like anything else about them, this is something that they do. They're really good at like combining things together and actually having like universes rather than just a nebulous of games. As always, as I often point out with things, and as always with Fantasy Flight Games, blah, too many FFs in this world, really.
Or not enough.
Or not enough, maybe, yeah. Maybe if there was more, it'd be easier to distinguish. Talking. So, the art in this game is spectacular. It's, as always, it is absolutely fantastic. I can say no wrong about it. In addition to that, the miniatures themselves, the plastic miniatures, are absolutely spectacular. There was actually, I'm not sure, Jason, if you remember this coming up, but when this game was actually delayed originally because the plastic miniatures that were originally coming out for the first printing of it, Fantasy Flight, I don't know who chose to do this, if it was the game designer or if it was like just a quality control department or something. They actually looked at the plastic figures and said, no, those aren't good enough, we're going to try again.
Yeah.
And that was pretty spectacular. Like, they had to push this back a little while because of that, and that's all right with me, because they look great. I spent some time actually painting up a couple of them. I'm really, really proud of my Shoggoth. I thought that I was trying to capture the painting scheme of their Arkham Horror, like the pictures that they have in Arkham Horror sort of style. So I was trying to go with that painting scheme. And, so I mean, like, the miniatures not being painted for some people could be a big issue, but honestly for me, if you're a miniature hobbyist like myself, or even Jason, you've been getting into this more and more lately as well too.
A little bit, yeah.
And I mean, if you like painting miniatures, this really isn't a bad thing at all. They're sweet miniatures.
So one of the major things for me with this game is sort of the replayability, and like this is something that always gets me with games that have individual scenarios. Because, let's face facts, after a while you get really tired of the same ones if you played them a few times. Now, that could still happen with this, but at the same time, because there are actually the story options, it does provide a little bit of variability within the scenario. So even if all the players have played a scenario, several times before, they wouldn't necessarily know which options that the keeper has chosen. They might not have seen them all yet. So, it keeps it relatively fresh, which, I really appreciate.
And one of the big advantages, too, with the way that they've done this scenario-based content, they've made this game very modular. So you get this... they've already released, I believe, 3 or 4 single scenarios.
Thereabouts,
yeah. I mean, like, there's 5 scenarios with the basic game. I believe it's 5. And then there's an expansion that I do actually have, which I'm sure you might have noticed some of the expansion bits in there, that comes with 3 more scenarios, I believe. And... so, like, that's all fine and dandy, like, you've gotten this big book with more scenarios, but they've actually released individual scenarios. So, similar to, like, their living card game, or, like, these other modular games that they're making, you can literally just drop 10 or, I think it's maybe $15.
Thereabouts, yeah, it's pretty cheap.
On these print-on-demand scenarios, and that scenario has literally everything you need as far as cards-wise to actually go at it. Their exploration cards, I believe, because they're using this print-on-demand service rather than their usual printing service, they note that the cards actually do look different, like the backs and such, from the regular standard cards. However, they've included all the basic cards that you need. So rather than using your basic items from your regular sets, you just use all the cards that are included with it, and then, like, the bigger cards and such, you add on top of that and such.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, they've done this really fantastic thing with their scenarios where they've made it modular, so much so that, whenever I play games like this, I always want to kind of make my own scenarios, but to be honest, I have ideas for scenarios I'd want to make, but I'm still running through all these scenarios, and I mean, there's so many options with each one of them that it's, like, you know what this kind of reminds me of? This reminds me of what Betrayal could have been.
Yeah, if they'd actually continued on with it.
Yeah. Because they could have just, like, once a year just put out, like, another little expansion that was, like, 1 or 2 extra scenarios with a couple more extra cards that come with it for maybe, like, $10 or so a pop. and then voila, like you finally have like a little bit of progression on with these characters that are just going through this random mansion and such. Mansions of Madness is, I don't know, like I kind of feel like it's some sort of spiritual successor to Betrayal at the House on the Hill, even though they're like, I don't think that the design team was in any way related.
Well, no, I kind of felt the same way, and that's actually the way I've described it to a couple of people. Is that it's kind of like Betrayal at House on the Hill, but it really is. It's a very similar genre, but they've really expanded on a lot of things, and they've really provided that modularity, that replayability. Not to say that Betrayal isn't replayable.
Oh, no, not at all.
But I think there's a lot more promise in this, and they're actually continuing to expand it, which is a big thing.
Yeah, especially since I believe we touched on this in the actual Arkham Horror review that we did for about Christmas time. It seems as though Arkham Horror has sort of run its course with Fantasy Flight to an extent. I don't suspect we'll see any more expansions for it so far. I mean, as I say this, I'm sure there's probably a Fantasy Flight article I overlooked that there's like, here's the next little box expansion, but I kind of feel like they're done with it because they've got this one and they put out Elder Sign in the same year, and I feel like this and Elder Sign are sort of the way of the future. Elder Sign is a game that we haven't done yet, but I'm sure that knowing our track record with Lovecraftian horror-based games, I'm sure that that's coming up for
Someday.
Exactly. But Mansions of Madness, I think that overall we're fairly excited about this game. I always love playing this, and it has similar flaws though to Arkham though, in terms of the scope of the game. Setup and putting back is kind of choresome at times.
Although, it is a lot better than Arkham Horror. There are a lot. You will probably have noticed there are a lot less decks, a lot less pieces. So it's not to that level.
It kind of gives Arkham Horror a run for its money as far as decks go.
I don't know. I still think that Mansions of Madness is a lot less work.
I would probably agree with that. The only thing that I've ever found that kind of bugs me in this game is the initial setup with the Keeper. I find that the initial setup with the Keeper tends to drag a little bit. And that's why it's really important that the Investigator side don't even look at the Investigator options until they set up the board. After they set up the board, then they can go and have fun and play with the rest of the stuff. So the Keeper can throw all this... so that the Keeper can throw down all the rest of their things. If the Investigators don't do that, then the game's setup tends to drag. Also, good God, this game sometimes can be a chore to put back. I'm not sure how much you saw of my organizational system for this box during the review, but man, this took me a while to actually get down. Oh man, so much work.
Yeah, and it only took about 200 bags.
Oh, somewhere around 200 bags.
Yeah.
A little bit.
It's all good, Ken. It's all good.
Yeah. But, I mean, this game is fantastic. If you like Fantasy Flight's gigantic games, this is one for the list.
Yeah.
All right, Mansions of Madness. Jason, what do you think?
Personally, I'm going to give this a 4.5. I really, really enjoy this game. I really like the idea, the concept. It's probably not one of my favorite games, mostly because it is a little hefty and it's hard to get people into, but still, it's pretty close for me. It really is. Mm-hmm. How about you, Ken? What do you think?
4.5 out of 5. It's not a perfect game. The game itself is kind of rough in terms of its setup and its put down time. But when you play this game, it is spectacular. It's really fun. It's so heavy in theme. If you and your group like to actually get into character and such, this game is perfect for you. And really, you actually feel like you're playing through stories in the Lovecraftian mythos, as opposed to with Arkham Horror, which is still a fantastic game, but it just sort of feels like you're just nebulously sort of dealing with a whole bunch of stories rather than one. With this, you really get down and dirty into one story and investigating it, and it does a really good job of that.
Yep.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to give us a grand total of 9 meeples. I'd say this game deserves no less.
Absolutely. So that's it for today. Join us next time for Year or So.
See you later, and have good games.